There was a post on Twitter over the last few days where it was obvious, like, engagement baiting, asking about games that are getting ruined for casual players by quote-unquote toxic over-competitive players. And I think a lot of people missed the point of that discussion because they just kept bringing up legitimately competitive games. I pointed this out. Some people were operating on the assumption that games have to make a point to draw, like, strict, absolute boundaries between competitive players and casual players, and even in games that are meant to be primarily one or the other, that's just not how it works. Maybe in the early days of, like, going all the way back, Capcom vs. SNK2 on Xbox Live, Street Fighter Anniversary Collection on Xbox Live, there was probably a way that you could have done that if you got everyone to commit. Pick a setting and you're locked into it for the life of your account, you know? I don't think that was necessarily realistic even back then, but that would likely be the way to do it. Commit to staying away from ranked forever, or commit to staying away from casual play forever, right? The problem now is, and this isn't just a fighting game discussion, I'm just speaking of it in the context of fighting games because that's what I'm from, right? Like, this could be Overwatch, this could be Madden, it could be a lot of things. To be truthful, I don't know exactly how other games handle it, other genres handle it. I definitely had some things to say about it, and another VTuber, Lulu, chimed in and basically said that either way, the goal should be to improve even if you don't win. Like, even if you're playing in casual play or ranked matches or whatever. And I said, the other thing that jumps out at me is the false dichotomy that, again, assumes that these games are being made with the specific goal of keeping casual and competitive players segregated from each other. A competitive player will occasionally feel like playing matches with nothing on the line. You see me do that all the time when I go into the Battle Hub. Maybe they know they're off their game that day, and maybe they just want to warm up. Likewise, a casual player might feel like testing the waters and seeing how good they actually are in concrete terms like a rank. But in neither of these cases do they owe their opponents any particular change in approach to the game. I've said this for over 2 decades now. You do not owe your opponent a fun experience. Like, be social, don't be an asshole outside of the bounds of the game, but play the game your way. Even assuming the expectation of player-based separation, that doesn't account for online modes that exist outside of that, because I'm a master rank in Street Fighter 6. Does that mean I should abstain from participating in the Battle Hub with my friends because it's not a form of ranked play? Should Battle Hub servers be segregated too between competitive and casual or certain ranks? I know they have a beginner's set of servers. It's definitely an idea they could build on if they so desired. And if so, what would I do if I wanted to go there with my non-master rank friends, which I often do, sometimes on stream? There's just so much that doesn't get accounted for in the discourse, and it's kind of hard to pin down how exactly you would handle a situation like that if the goal was to draw a stronger line of protection between the casual audiences and more competitive, more experienced, higher tier competition, right? I do think that there is value in looking for ways to prevent people from getting wazzled. We'll say. You don't want, as a publisher, as a developer, you don't want people to just... Yes, wazzled is what happens when somebody picks up a game for the first time, goes online, and runs into a legitimate competitive threat. What happened was, I think it was Marvel vs. Capcom Fighting Collection when it first came out. Justin Wong created an account, called himself the Wazzler, and just started rushing people down hardcore in the lower ranks. Deadass people were returning the game over it. It was a whole thing. He was hardcore trolling, but he was rushing down hardcore and just beating down people who were not ready for anything close to that experience. But it's funny as fuck. Now, I've talked before on stream about using game design to try and facilitate a casual to competitive pipeline. That's not new. I've talked about having a robust single-player mode that actually trains players and prepares them for the kind of stuff they're going to see in ranked. It really is. Like, especially in a game like Marvel vs. Capcom 2, I can't even put it into words. Like, you can just straight up suffocate somebody in that game who isn't ready for it. Now, I've talked before on stream about using single-player modes to train players up, to teach them what they need to know. Obviously, you have Virtua Fighter 4 on the PS2 that did a great job of this, but didn't really have anywhere to send players when they were done, and that was unfortunate because that was probably the best developed game to produce talent. Ideally, you have that single-player game that never truly ends, that once you roll the credits, it strongly encourages players to go online, even if it's just in lobbies, casual matches, whatever. Get some experience there. Take some replay data from that and bring it back into the single-player mode in its endgame and use whatever it found there to train the player up further on stuff that they're weak sauce against. This would even be useful for already skilled players, right? So you'd have not only the casual to competitive pipeline, but you'd also have a utility that already competitive players would be able to utilize. And that's all stuff that I've touched on before on stream. Even with that in mind, I don't think it's realistic to expect strict segregation of casual and competitive players, with online modes generally having elements that can appeal to both. I think any genuine solution to smurfing would have to be multifaceted. The problem is that a pro can easily mimic a scrub if it's trying to convince an AI, or if it's just trying to convince an algorithm that it's a lower skill player. I think the best way to do that, to dissuade someone from actually targeting a lower rank, is to make the ranked grind a little harder than it is right now. Because you can drop a top-level player in, say, Bronze or Silver League. If they're actually a top-level player, that right now they could probably get to Master rank in an evening or two. It's not difficult. Or at least it's not time-consuming, I would say. I think if you make that a little grindier and get the more skilled players sick of beating down lesser competition, almost punish them with a parade of tomato cans, right? Dissuade that behavior any way you have to. I don't know, that's probably not a great idea. It's the first thing that I could think of. At the same time, doing so would probably risk even more people getting wazzled, and obviously that's what we're trying to avoid here. I don't know. I haven't really thought that part through completely, and that's why I say, like, any solution to smurfing would have to be multifaceted. You'd have to have an algorithm in place. I just think it's been a really, really long time since that dichotomy has been as cut and dried as people like to pretend that it is. The initial posts seem to be operating on the assumption that being competitive was in and of itself, quote-unquote, toxic, right? There are truly a lot of games that are made for that purpose, to be competitive titles. And I think being genuinely competitive, even against people who aren't necessarily ready for it, that's not the toxic thing in those situations. The toxic thing is for truly casual players to go into those games and just expect to be catered to. Right? You don't want some 5'8" kid out of high school just demanding to be allowed into the NBA. That's the kind of energy that these people are coming with into fighting games and probably a lot of other genres as well. And I don't think they should... Obviously, I don't think they should be catered to. Obviously, if there's the potential that they can improve, then accommodate that, encourage that. Yeah, exactly. That's why I say accommodate that. I would probably put some disclaimers on the online play, and first thing I do when somebody fires up the game is just kind of take their measure as a player. See what they can handle, see what they can't handle, see what they need to learn. And you can do all this with not even AI opponent in the sense that we think of AI today, but just an AI opponent in the 1991, 1992 sense. Just program it to do certain tactics, program it to measure reactions of players, and see where they're at. And if they aren't ready, then you don't tell them no because they paid for the game, but you do tell them, look, there's stuff that you're going to need to work on before you're ready for what you're going to find in the online modes. And strongly encourage them to do that and gear your single-player mode toward teaching them all of this stuff. And again, we're circling back to stuff that I've talked about on stream before, but I feel really strongly about that. I think there's a lot of uncharted territory on that front. I think Namco got as close as anyone ever did with Soul Calibur, and they didn't go hard enough on it. And they didn't have anywhere, like with Virtua Fighter, they didn't have an online mode to funnel people into when they started doing that stuff. Would have been amazing if they could have. And I do think that, we're seeing $1 million world championships, $1.5 million world championships. This stuff's going to become more important as we move forward.